The ideal lover. Youth is the best time of our lives. We dream big and work little, and everyone encourages us to follow our dreams. When we grow up, everything changes. People treat us differently and our outlook on life changes drastically. We feel disappointed by people and reality. It doesn't match up to what we wanted, and our dreams are shattered. The ideal lover seduces his victims by reflecting their fantasies. They create an illusion that most people cannot resist. Whatever fantasy you long for, whether it's adventure or romance, the ideal lover provides you with it. A beautiful woman was sitting in the audience next to her husband when a stylish man caught her eye. He was Casanova, and he introduced himself after the performance. He was romantic and attractive. She invited him to a ball she was attending the following night, and Casanova agreed to go, but only if she promised to dance with him. He was bold, but very gentle at the same time. By the end of the ball, she had fallen for him. She invited him over to have dinner one night and showed him around the house when her husband went to bed. She pointed to a chapel nearby. She mentioned that she attended mass there, and to her surprise, Casanova appeared in the chapel the next morning. He approached her once again and told her that he would hide there at night for her to go visit him. The chapel wasn't comfortable. It was dirty and filled with rats, but the fact that he was willing to sacrifice comfort for her hooked her even more. She was a religious woman and she felt guilty for having an affair in the chapel, but this made everything a lot more exciting. She was bored of her husband and she needed an adventure. The affair lasted several days. She even started to bring him food, candles, and books to make his stay more pleasant. Everything seemed perfect, but she had to leave on a trip with her husband for a couple of days, and when she returned, Casanova was gone and she had no idea where to find him. Miss Pauline was a Portuguese woman in London looking for a place to stay. Her husband had to return home, and she was alone at the time. She was part of the Portuguese nobility, but she was running out of money and she couldn't go back to Portugal just yet. She was lonely, depressed, and her financial situation wasn't at its peak. She heard of a man looking for someone to rent part of his house for cheap. The man was Casanova, and he was very charming and his house was nice. Casanova offered her a decent place to live for very little money, and he didn't ask for much. The only thing he asked for was some company every once in a while. He claimed to be lonely and he wanted to spend time with a friend. They played chess, talked about literature, and they sometimes went riding horses together. Casanova gave Miss Pauline a good time, but the time for her to return to Portugal was getting closer, and Casanova wasn't making this easy for her. He told her that he loved her. She confessed to have feelings for him as well, but she was a married woman, and she couldn't stay. Depressed by her words, Casanova went riding alone and fell off his horse. When she heard of the accident, she felt guilty and ran to see him. Casanova was so gentle to her and so cool, and she could not resist him. They became lovers that day. By the time she had to return to Portugal, she wanted to stay in London with him, but Casanova encouraged her to leave. He loved her and he wanted her to stay, but the circumstances signaled that they weren't meant to be together. They had a great time, and he promised to never forget her. Years later, Casanova was living in Spain, and he noticed a beautiful young woman leaving church. Her name was Ignacia, and he approached her and invited her over to dance as he walked her home. Although she was engaged, Ignacia liked him and agreed to go dance with him the following evening. She enjoyed spending time with him, and by the time the night was over, Casanova confessed his love for her. She was in a difficult situation. She loved him, but she was engaged. This didn't stop Casanova from going out with her a couple more times and deepening the effect he already had on her. Her emotions reached their peak when Casanova introduced her to a friend of his, a duchess that was madly in love with him and flirted with him in front of Ignacia. The jealousy she felt in that moment drove her mad. She was religious and engaged. She felt guilty for liking Casanova, but she could not help being so attracted to him. Casanova was leaving Spain at some point, and Ignacia was well aware that he would never marry her, but despite her difficult situation, she broke off her engagement and confessed her love to him. A brief time with Casanova was more valuable to her than a lifetime with her fiancé. Women were drawn to Casanova. Very few could resist him because he became the ideal lover for each and every woman he seduced. His strategy was simple. He would study his victims carefully to discover what they were missing and provide them with it. The first woman was married to a boring man that lacked passion. What she longed for was romance and adventure. Casanova's uncomfortable stay at the chapel was a sacrifice that added romance to the affair. Every night she left home to go see him gave her a thrill that she had never experienced before. Miss Pauline was ashamed of being short on money as part of the Portuguese nobility, and she was lonely. She was in need of a man who would spend quality time with her and who would treat her like a lady, regardless of her financial situation. Ignacia was a religious woman with an easy life. What she needed was to sin and to suffer to feel alive. The affair with Casanova and the jealousy she experienced did the trick. The ideal lover is so seductive because very few people are willing to focus so intensely on their targets. One has to study each of its victims rigorously and become exactly what each one wants. The dreams of one person are different to the dreams of another. It takes patience, attention, and a lot of effort to mold yourself into the fantasy of the other person, but if you do, you will be rewarded. People have an ideal of who they want to be or what they want their partner to be for them, but this is usually buried in disappointment. If another person seems to have that ideal quality, or to have the ability to bring it out in us, we fall in love. To be an ideal lover, you have to focus on your target and interpret their behavior and words correctly. Pay attention to their voice, their eyes, and their body language, and try to figure out what they're thinking and feeling. Be careful with the value and the meaning you give to their words. These tend to have a hidden meaning behind them, and they can be misleading. What they say may not be as important as how they say it, but if you can interpret their words correctly, you may be able to find an insecurity or a desire. Focus on their unconscious behavior. Learn to read body language and you will be able to figure them out without them having to say a word. If you can also figure out what they do on a daily basis, this will be very useful. Habits and routines say a lot about a person. The Japanese courtesan, Dewa, was out walking with a rich man named Nissan. She loved nature and described her ideal garden to him. Nissan had his servants tearing down part of his house and using the space to turn it into the exact garden that Dewa described to him the day before. She woke up the next day to see it and she fell in love with him. Sergei Saltykov wanted to seduce the Grand Duchess Catherine, but she was married. Her husband was a very powerful man that was extremely jealous, and he had servants watching her all the time. This made her life miserable. She wanted a friend, or maybe something more than that. Saltykov befriended her husband and the servants, and his charms earned him some alone time with the Duchess. He seduced her, and she even had his child. You may not have to go to as much trouble or risk, but you will always be rewarded for actions that reveal a sense of self-sacrifice or devotion. If you accidentally show your victim something that doesn't fit his or her ideal, the spell will be broken. Define your intention before playing the role of the ideal lover. If your intention is to get into a relationship with your victim, seducing them as the ideal lover may not be the best idea. This is because the more time the victim spends with you, the more likely they are to realize that you're imperfect, and imperfection is the ideal lover's worst enemy. The ideal lover thrives on perfection. If your victim starts to grow cold, this may be because they started to notice your shortcomings. What you want to do is disappear for some time. This will allow your victim to forget your flaws and idealize you once again. Casanova's seductions were so effective because he would always pick a victim that was bound to leave, or he would be the one to leave before his victims ever had the chance to lose attraction and fall out of love. Distance doesn't allow them to realize that you're just another flawed human being. When reality intrudes, distance is often a solution. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more.